Hi, I'm Michelle from How Much She Paper Blooms. I'm really excited to get started with today's video because I'm actually bringing you a little mini series. It's time to put together everything we've learned so far. So there's going to be a few different videos which will make up this little series. So we can focus on small little bites at a time, but at the end of it you will have made your own bouquet and you'll be able to put it all together and create your own display, whether that be a bouquet for in your home, maybe you've got an event or a party that you're planning, maybe it's your own wedding bouquet, or maybe it's just a gift for a friend. So for whatever reason, by the end of this series, you should be able to create that with what we've learned so far. So the series is going to be using the tutorials I've already brought to you. So I'll be focusing on the flowers we've already made. So that's a paper peony, chrysanthemum, hibiscus, some crepe paper leaves and plumeria. So we're going to be using all of those skills that we've learned so far and all of the little tricks and techniques that I've brought you. And then I'm going to start to touch on how we bring all of that together. Because obviously you can make a flower, but then what do you do with it once you've made it? Sometimes when you just put flowers in a vase, they don't really look great. They move around a lot, they don't stay in the right positions, they just need a bit of tweaking to make them look more realistic. So I'm going to show you how to do all of that. So today I want to focus on choosing the flowers that we're going to include. So obviously we've chosen the types of flowers, but we're going to look at the colours because it's really important to choose the right colour palette before you get started. If you're lucky, you might just have a good eye for it and you've already picked colours that will work great together. But don't worry if not, because we're going to work through that together. You're going to pick the colours today, you're going to choose which flowers are going to be in each colour, and then we're going to work through that. And then over the next few videos, I'll show you how you put those together in a vase. You'll see me making some of the flowers to go into that bouquet as well. We're going to choose the vases themselves together because obviously that's going to make a huge difference. If you pick something which is a single bud vase as opposed to a huge vase, you're going to need a lot more flowers. So we're going to look at the sizes of the bouquets and what you need to consider when you're making them. And then we'll also move on to actually putting them together into a bouquet that stays put. So whether that be for in a vase or to be handheld, or actually you can use it for both. And then once we've got them all styled in the vase, I'm also going to show you as a little bonus at the end how you can take that same bouquet and style that in a variety of different ways to create a new look every time. So if you get bored after a week or so of having the same flowers, how you can mix it up so you've always got a bit of variety in your home. So let's get into it. So first of all, I know I want to include pink hibiscus that I made as part of a previous tutorial. So that's this bright pink here. So I'm going to include the pink from that. And then also the stem is finished in this dark green already. So because I know I've already got those two colours, that's going to be my starting point. If you have something already made or some kind of inspiration image to start with, this is always a good point to start from and then to begin to work out from there. It just helps you to get started more than anything. Another good thing if you're struggling with inspiration for what you want your bouquet to look like is to just use existing images. So I love Pinterest for finding inspiration when you're not quite sure what route you want to go down. So head over to Pinterest. I'll pop a link below for where you can go and see my boards there. Make sure you follow me while you're there so that you get all of my updates. I have different boards on there and I just start sharing inspiration images as well. So that's a great thing you can do too, is to start some boards with inspiration of your favourite types of flowers, favourite colours and also bouquets. So if there's something in particular that you like the look of, just save it to a board, and then when you're doing things like this and you're not really sure where to start, you can just go to your inspiration boards and think, okay, I like the look of that, what is it that I like about it? And you'll probably notice that there's a common theme between the ones that you pin. So you'll probably end up pinning maybe more oranges one particular day. So then what you can do is take that and look at it and go, okay, the predominant colour in this board is various shades of orange. So I'm going to use that as a starting point for my bouquet. I'm going to pull out my orange crepe papers and I'm going to have a play with those, and then I'll see what works with those oranges. Another thing you can do if you're struggling for inspiration is to just have a look around your home. So if you are someone that likes bright, bold colours and you've got colour all over the house and you've got different colours in every room, and let's say you're designing a bouquet for in your home, if your room is mainly blues and purples, you probably aren't going to want to put a bright yellow in there. So you might want something a bit more muted and cooler toned. But if your home is very pale, pastel-y shades, again, you want something that's complementing that. So it might not work to have bright, bold colours then. If you've got a lot of white and natural light and maybe more of a monotone colour palette, you can add in any colours you want then, because then the flowers are the star of the show. But if you like to have more of a monotone colour palette, you're not so keen on the bright colours, you could have various different shades of white and cream, and just have a lot more green and foliage in there, because that's going to focus on the flowers as a centerpiece, but it's also going to follow your home decor style as well. So if you're designing this for a home decor piece, have a look around your home and see what you already have, see what's going to complement it, and work from there. And then finally, if you're planning this to be something for your wedding or for an event, maybe a baby shower, something like that, obviously you're going to have a colour palette in mind for that already. So make sure that when you're planning your flowers, the colours are something that's going to work with what you already have designed and planned for that as well. So most people, when you're planning a wedding, you have a colour palette in mind anyway, so you can just then coordinate your colour palette for that with your crepe paper colours as well. So just make sure that you're bearing in mind existing colours in whatever form they may be, whether it's a bridesmaid's dress or whether it's a piece of furniture in your home, or maybe it's like your friend's favourite colour if you're gifting them a bouquet. So just bear those things in mind and what the final use of the bouquet is going to be when you're designing it. So I know I want to include this pink hibiscus. I also know I want my bouquet to be bright and a little bit summery. So the first thing I'm going to do is just play with a few different colours and see how they all sit together. So I've got an idea that I like this pink kind of arrangement. So I've got a couple of other pinks that I can just put alongside them. So when I'm planning out my colour scheme, this is literally what I do. I just grab a few different colours and see how they sit alongside each other, just on the roll to start with. So I really like the more coral tones of these two pinks. So this one's more of a pink coral, this one's starting to get a little bit more peachy. And that would work really well because I already have these chrysanthemums in these two colours, which I made in a previous tutorial. So these are starting to work really nicely together. So you could, in theory, just do your whole bouquet in just maybe 2 or 3 colours like this. But if you're doing a large bouquet, that can look a little bit too samey. It really depends what size of bouquet you're planning. So for me, I know I want to do a large bouquet and it's going to be a centerpiece for my dining table. So it does help to have that in mind when you're planning this, like figuring out the size, even if you don't know exactly, just a rough idea. If it's going to be 1 or 2 flowers in a small bud vase, then you really don't need many different colours. But if you're going to have a huge bouquet, then you want a bit of variety in your colour palette. One of the ways I think I'm going to achieve that is with some more green. So I've already got this lighter green here, so I'm going to bring that in as well. And that's starting to brighten up the bouquet too. The other thing you want to think about is the contrast. So obviously there's a lot of contrast between these two greens and between the bright pink and the peachy colour, but there's something that's kind of missing in there, I think. It's almost like it just needs a little bit more. So I'm going to try and bring in this pale pink as well. So this is really pale, but I think that's going to really help with the contrast because you can see that next to the pink, that really stands out. So that's starting to work really nicely as a colour palette. To be honest, you could just leave it there. But because I want this to be more of a summery bouquet, I'm thinking I might add in some more yellow and maybe like a lemon colour. So I've got this nice lemon yellow, which I think will work really nicely. And I actually really like how that sits next to the pale pink as like a pastel-y tone, and also next to the corally peach. But that's also quite a nice contrast between the other pinks as well, so I'm going to include that. And then I think the other thing we might be missing is maybe another green. I do try to include as many greens as possible in my bouquets because obviously in nature every flower has a different shade of green. There's not just a standard colour palette. But green paper can be quite hard to come by and quite hard to find, so I do often end up dyeing my own. But for the purpose of this, I'm going to just use the standard colours, and we can get into colouring our own paper in a later tutorial. So for now, I'm going to add in this kind of mid green, so I've got 3 different shades. It sort of sits somewhere in the middle of those 2. So as I'm doing this, I'm also trying to picture what flowers would look good in each colour as well. So I can imagine this pale pink would look great with a really fluffy peony, because that's quite a common colour to get them in as well. And obviously the pink I've got in hibiscus, and I've got these mid-pink corals in some chrysanthemums. So I've already got those. Like I said, this one will make a great peony, maybe even this lemon as well. And then I also wanted to bring in the plumeria, which is also one of the tutorials we've done so far. That'll be in a white. Now that actually leads me on to thinking maybe a different route, because the plumeria centres are actually a nice bright yellow, so maybe we can get away with bringing in a bit more of that yellow into it as well. So I'm going to try this bright yellow as well and see how that looks. So that's obviously going to work with these ones. I don't like how it sits directly against the pale pink. There's a little bit of a clash there. But maybe against some of the others it might work. I'm not 100% sold on that. I think it's going to depend how it works alongside the plumeria. So I'm going to pop it in there for now. Obviously this isn't set in stone anyway, this will change as you're working and as you're arranging the bouquet, but I think that's a good starting point. So this is going to be my chosen colour palette to start with at least, and we'll see where we go. One of the things I want to point out as I'm doing this, obviously I started from a specific flower and I had a rough idea of where I wanted to go with the colour palette, but you really can just play around with different options, and you can take things out, see how you like that. Maybe you don't want the brighter colours and you want something a bit more pastel-y. This then becomes a completely different colour palette. Maybe if you introduced a pale lilac or something like that, then you've got a more pastel bouquet. As I say, you could just do the pinks. That becomes quite a nice bouquet. Maybe you don't like that green, so you switch those out. That instantly brightens it up. Maybe if you want a really bright bouquet, you start with the really bold colours like these, and then you just soften them. So what I would do there is take the bold colour and then take the softer version of it. So this is still a very bright pink, but it's a softer pink. Equally, this is a very bold yellow, and then you'd have the softer yellow. Now ideally I would try and find something in the middle of these two. This one's almost a bit too pale for that, but I don't have anything in stock at the moment. But maybe if you had a mid kind of yellow, that would work really nice. And then with the green again, this isn't quite the right shade of green, but maybe if you'd got more of an olive green, maybe if you go with the bold green here, and then you would add in a paler version. So you can really play with your colour palettes and just figure out what you like. It doesn't even need to be correct to nature. Lay them all out on the table if that's what you need to do, and then just mix them around. So take one out, add one in there, maybe add in some different colours, and keep playing with it until you're happy with it. Always make sure that you've got at least one, if not 2 or 3 greens in there, because obviously you are going to have some kind of foliage in every bouquet. So always make sure you've got the greens in there. And also don't just look at them separately, because if you see here, these 3 colours together look great, then when you add in the green, it completely changes the dimension of the group of colours. The other thing I wanted to show you is the difference between stretched and unstretched crepe paper, because that can really impact your colours too. So when I get a new roll of crepe paper, I like to just cut a sample piece. So I like to just cut a sample piece of crepe paper, and I just stick these into a little notebook so that I have them as a reference, and then I just write the name of the brand and the colour next to them. And then I have a stretched piece and an unstretched piece. So I'm going to cut this one into half. So here you can see the unstretched colour, and then I'm going to stretch it out about halfway. I'm not going to stretch this all the way, just a little bit. So you can already see, I'm not sure if that will show up on camera, but in real life that's already starting to look slightly different. So this colour is looking a lot paler. So if I now stretch that all the way, and there's like no stretch left in that, that's now a completely different colour. So that's something to bear in mind when you are picking your colours. That if you're going to be using flowers which need you to stretch the petals completely, make sure you're comparing your colours with stretched out crepe paper. So obviously it depends on the petal. So for the hibiscus, it's not going to be fully stretched like that. It'll be somewhere in the middle, so it's going to be somewhere like this. So the difference is not quite as harsh, but there is still a difference comparing that to the unstretched. So actually in itself that creates quite a nice colour palette, so it depends what flowers you're making, but if you're using 3 different flowers with different amounts of stretch to the crepe, you could in theory just use 1 roll of paper and still get 3 completely different colours. Also don't forget if you're going to be using any pastels, so the hibiscus tutorial we used the pastel, so on this one I used a purple. That's going to create a different colour again. So the pink I used for the hibiscus was this same one, and it's obviously slightly stretched but not fully. You can see the difference there. This one's obviously got more of a purple tinge to it because I used the pan pastels on it. So just from 1 roll of crepe paper in this bright pink, I've actually created 4 different colours without really using any advanced techniques or anything like that. So it's really interesting to play around with this. So also when we have the bright yellow, for example, this is going to be quite bright if it's left unstretched. It is a very, very bold yellow. It'd be perfect for sunflower petals or something like that. It's very, very bold. So there's not going to be that many flowers you would want to use it for unstretched. But again, let me show you the difference. So we have an unstretched, and I'm going to stretch this all the way out. And again, do you see the difference there? So it really is worth playing around with stretching your crepe papers as well. Now obviously you won't want to use fully stretched out crepe paper for every flower that you make. It's really going to depend on the type of flower. But that's something to bear in mind when you're designing your bouquet. So obviously I'm picking my colours now before I start making any flowers. I've got my one hibiscus made, and I do have some other flowers already made which might work, and so I'm going to try and play around with those. But if I didn't have those made already, then I would think, okay, what can I make in this yellow which requires a stretched out petal, and what can I make that doesn't require a stretched out petal? And then the same with this one. Obviously this is going to go paler if I put this again. So then again we have a big difference in the colour. So this has gone to almost like a cream colour now. So if I compare that to white, you'll see it is different. It's much more similar to the white now than it was to the yellow. So that'd be quite a nice subtle way of bridging the gap between the white and the lemon yellow as well. So this would be quite a nice colour palette now. So from 3 papers that didn't quite work together, I now have 5 which work together perfectly. This would be a really nice bright citrusy type bouquet, and you've automatically got your own colour palette without too much effort. So just bear that in mind when you're picking your flowers. So you also want to think about warm and cool colour palettes when you're choosing your colours. So cool colours tend to be things with blue tones to them. Not necessarily all blues, but as a general rule of thumb. So things like a nice cool toned icy white, or a blue, or a teal, things like that, they tend to be more of your cool tones. And then warmer tone colours are things like oranges, reds, warm pinks. Are obviously overlaps, so yellows for example. The yellow of a sunflower petal would be a warm yellow, but then maybe like the yellow of the outside of a lemon is a warm yellow, but when you chop into the inside, it's got a bit more of a green tinge to it, and that sometimes can be more of a cool yellow. There's obviously different varieties within each colour and each shade and tone, but we don't need to get into the full extent of those. It's not really relevant. The reason I'm mentioning this is it just helps you to piece together your colours a lot easier if you're focusing on either warm or cool. So because I know mine's a summer bouquet, I'm going with a warm palette. That's why I have a lot of pinks and corals, and I have those peachy tones. And yes, I've got the yellow in there, but it's a warm toned yellow. If I wanted something a little bit more wintry, for example, then I could still use a pale pink, but maybe I pair it with like an ice blue and a navy blue and more of a cool toned white rather than a cream. I actually made a bouquet which was more of a winter one, which I'll pop up on the screen for you now. Now that actually used the same pink, the pale pink, which I said before would be good to use for a peony. Now on its own, that pink is a warm pink, but by pairing it with other cooler toned colours, that's actually making the bouquet as a whole more of a cool toned bouquet. So I've probably lost you now, haven't I? But what I'm trying to get at is you want to consider your bouquet as a whole, because each colour will impact all of the other colours. So you want to try different combinations and play around until the whole bouquet works together. The worst thing to do in this situation would be to make lots of individual flowers and not consider them all together and how they're going to work as a bouquet. So once you've had a play with the rolls of paper, just compare them to each other and how they work as a collective group. Okay, so I'm going to start planning out my flowers. Obviously we already know the types of flower we're going to use, so just to recap, that's hibiscus, peony, plumeria and chrysanthemum, and then some foliage. So the easy one with that is my plumeria. Obviously that is already a set colour, so that's white with a tinge of yellow and pink. So I already have my plumeria stem, and I also have a bright pink hibiscus that I want to use as well, so we can add that in. And then the peony that we made as part of the peony tutorial, I have in this coral colour, so I'm going to add that in too, which is this colour here. And then also, if you remember, I made 3 chrysanthemums which were in the same colour palette. They're all in slightly different shades. So there was this one which was in, the outer petals are in this colour, the centre is in this pink. Then I made one very similar, but the centre is more of a peachy colour. Now I don't have that peach in this palette, but that's the only place it's going to feature, and actually I think it's okay because it's in the same tone and it's similar to the yellow anyway. So I'm going to include that one. And then I also have this pink, which is this pink, and the centre is in the paler peachy pink. So I'm going to add that in too. So you can see we're already starting to form a bit of a bouquet there. Now I think to balance it, I'm probably going to have quite a bit of plumeria. So I'm just going to add I have a couple more stems, which you might have seen in my latest video where I was fixing some flowers. So that's these ones here. So I'm just going to dot those around to give me the contrast between the flowers, because obviously they won't sit all grouped together, there will be other flowers between them. And this is just going to help me to visualise what the finished bouquet is going to look like. And then also some greenery. So I'm just going to add in a couple of different stems of greenery so that I can start to picture that too. So that's starting to look quite good. Obviously we're missing some yellows, so I'm going to have to make some yellow flowers. So what I'm going to do here is think about what would work nicely in these yellows. So I'm thinking the bright yellow would work really well for hibiscus, because obviously it's a tropical flower, it's very brightly coloured. So I'm thinking I'll do some yellow hibiscus. The lemon colour, this one, I think will work really nicely as a peony, because it's that more pastel shade. I think I'm going to make another yellow peony. And then also we need to bring in this pale pink, which again I think would work quite nicely as a peony. And then we've got this peachy colour in here, we've got the pink in there, and we've got the bright pink. The green foliage, we've obviously already got some in the stems of this green and the peony leaf, and then I'm going to bring in the darker shade green and the mid green in my foliage. So I think that's going to work really nicely with my colour palette. So I think what I need to make is a couple of peonies and some hibiscus, maybe a little bit more plumeria, and lots of foliage. Now, foliage is always the winner when you're not sure, because it'll fill any gaps and also hide any of your mistakes and all of the ugly stems and things like that. So particularly when you're new to it, just make lots of foliage and you can cover up everything. So the next thing is to think about your quantities. As a rule of thumb, I always like to try and do everything in thirds. That probably comes from the designer in me. So I was a commercial interior designer for 15 years. So using the rule of thirds is a well-known technique in the architecture and interior design world. So that's something that comes from there, but I think it can be applied to all kinds of art and design too. I always try and have an odd number of flowers rather than an even number, but if I can, I try and do them in threes as well. It just helps make everything feel more balanced, more realistic and less symmetrical. Obviously you rarely see symmetry in nature. So I'm going to plan to have 3 of the peonies, 3 chrysanthemums, and then I'm thinking maybe 6 of the hibiscus, just because it would be nice to bring in some different colours. So I'm thinking maybe some of these pinky ones might work good for a couple of hibiscus as well. So maybe I will make a couple of the yellow hibiscus and then a few of the pink and the peachy colour as well. So I've got 6 in total. And then obviously my peony, I'm going to have 1 in this peachy colour, 1 in the lemon, 1 in the pink. My chrysanthemums I already have 3 of. And then I think I want to have maybe 15 or so foliage branches, but obviously that's something that you can change as you go along. So hopefully you've had a good think about your colour palette now, and you've got a good idea what kind of colourings you want your bouquet to be in, and you know which flowers are going to be in which colours. So in the next episode we can then jump into making them and pulling them all together so that you're ready to get started actually arranging them as well. If you like this video, then please do hit the thumbs up button, and also don't forget to subscribe if you're not already. It really does help me out. If you've been following me on Facebook or Instagram, you'll see that I've started to hit a few of my milestones for YouTube. And they're only very small. I know a lot of people on here have millions of followers and subscribers and all the rest of it. But for me, these small milestones mean so much. And I really do appreciate each and every one of you that's watching this video, that's hitting the subscribe button, that's hitting like, and that's commenting below this video, because every single person really has helped me out. And I love the community that we're building here together. So Tom actually for that. Also, in case I haven't mentioned before, I don't remember if I have or not, so Tom actually means thanks very much. It's from the north of England, which is where I'm from. And it's just I guess a slang way of just saying thanks very much. So if you hear me say Tom that's why. So Tom for liking, sharing, subscribing, all of the things, and just for being here. Thank you so much. Tom for being here to celebrate the special moments with me.